By the time Miles pulled up outside my apartment, Benny was already sitting beside the door with his leash in his mouth. "That eager to get rid of me?" I asked him. His tail thumped against the floor. 8 months after Miles and I broke up, we had reduced our relationship to a schedule that worked almost embarrassingly well. Friday evenings, one of us handed Benny over. The next Friday, we switched. Food, medication, vet appointments, grooming, we kept everything organized, polite, and safely practical. Miles knocked twice before opening the door. "Hey! Hey!" He crouched immediately when Benny launched himself at him. "There's my guy." I watched Miles scratch behind Benny's ears, smiling in that unguarded way I remembered too well. Then he glanced up at me. "You cut your hair." My hand went automatically to the shorter side near my temple. "Yesterday. It looks good." There was no reason those 3 words should have made the room feel smaller. I handed him Benny's medication pouch. Same dose. Nothing changed. Miles took it, but instead of clipping on the leash and leaving, he stayed by the door. There might be something changing. I looked at him. My company offered me a position in Portland. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood him. "Portland?" "Yeah." Benny leaned against Miles's leg, completely unconcerned. "When?" "I haven't accepted it." Miles looked down at the leash in his hand. "They want an answer soon." I folded my arms. "And if you take it?" He finally met my eyes. "We'd have to figure out Benny." That was the practical answer, the obvious answer, but all I could think was that there would be no more Friday knocks, no more medication bags changing hands, no more pretending I didn't notice when Miles stayed an extra 5 minutes talking about absolutely nothing. "We'll figure it out," I said. "Right?" Neither of us moved. Benny looked from him to me as if waiting for one of us to give a command. Miles opened the door, then paused again. "I'll text you." "You always do." Something shifted across his face before he smiled. Then he left with Benny. I stood in the doorway watching them disappear down the sidewalk, and for the first time, since the breakup, our custody schedule no longer felt permanent. It felt like a countdown. The next morning, my phone buzzed while I was making coffee. "Miles, Benny's medication is still at your place." I stared at the message, then at the small pouch sitting exactly where I had handed it to him the night before. Apparently, somewhere between Portland and pretending neither of us cared about Portland, he had left it on my entry table. I typed, "I can bring it over." His reply came almost immediately. "Already nearby. Meet you at the dog park?" 20 minutes later, I saw Benny before I saw Miles. He came charging toward me at the end of his leash, tail swinging hard enough to move his entire body. "You'd think I abandoned him for a year," I said. Miles smiled. "You did sleep without him once. Cruel and unusual punishment." I handed over the medication pouch. That should have been it. Instead, Miles nodded toward the path around the park. "Want to walk with us?" I should have said no. We had spent 8 months getting good at boundaries. "Sure." We fell into step with Benny between us. For the first few minutes, we talked about him, his appetite, his medication, whether he had finally stopped trying to steal socks from Miles's laundry basket. Then I asked, "How would custody even work if you moved?" Miles was quiet for a moment. "It probably wouldn't. Not like this. Portland isn't exactly a Friday night handoff." "I know. So Benny stays with one of us." His jaw tightened slightly. "Probably." The word landed harder than it should have. We reached the cafe patio beside the park, and Miles stopped. "Coffee?" I looked at him. "What?" "You're making this a very long medication pickup." "I'm thirsty." Before I could answer, he went inside. He returned with 2 cups and handed me one. I took a sip. "Oat milk. No sugar." "You remembered." Miles gave me a strange look. Of course I remembered. Of course. As if 8 months apart had not been enough time to forget something that small. Benny wrapped his leash around my ankle while I was holding the cup. Without thinking, I passed the coffee to Miles. He took it without looking. I untangled the leash, straightened Benny's harness, then reached back. Miles was already holding my cup toward me. The whole exchange took maybe 10 seconds. It felt exactly like 100 mornings from before we broke up. I took the cup. Miles looked away first. So, I said, if you take the job, we need an actual plan. I haven't taken it. You keep saying that. Because I haven't. I studied him. Is something wrong with the offer? No. It's a good position. Then why are you hesitating? His fingers tightened around his coffee cup. I'd have to reorganize everything. People reorganize things when they move. I know. I waited. Miles looked toward Benny instead. That familiar irritation rose in me. The old feeling of standing outside a locked door while Miles insisted there was nothing behind it. I kept my voice even. We can work out what's best for Benny. You don't have to plan your career around alternating Fridays. His eyes came back to mine. I've planned work around those Fridays before. I frowned. What? Nothing dramatic. I've switched shifts, moved meetings, turned down a couple weekend things. For Benny. A pause. For the schedule. There was something about the distinction that bothered me, though I couldn't explain why. I looked down at Benny, who had stretched himself across the pavement between our chairs. There were easier ways to do this, I said. We could have changed weeks whenever work got complicated. I didn't want to. Why? Miles rubbed his thumb along the cardboard seam of his cup. Because the routine worked. It was a reasonable answer. That was the problem. Almost everything about us had become reasonable after the breakup. We had divided Benny's things, made a calendar, agreed on expenses, created rules designed to make sure neither of us had to wonder when we would see the other again. I had always thought the schedule existed because neither of us wanted another fight. Now I found myself wondering why Miles had worked so hard to protect it. Benny suddenly stood and leaned against both our legs, demanding attention. Miles laughed softly. I reached down at the same time he did. Our hands stopped inches apart over Benny's back. Neither of us touched. The other. Miles pulled his hand away. We should probably get going. Yeah. We stood, and this time there was no confusion about who took Benny. It was Miles's week. But as I watched him walk away, coffee still warm in my hand, I realized I was thinking less about the possibility of losing our custody arrangement. I was thinking about all the effort Miles had quietly made to keep it. By Wednesday evening, Benny was back with me. Normally, the first thing he did after a handoff was inspect every room as if I might have remodeled the apartment during Miles's week. Then he ate, drank half his water, and collapsed somewhere inconvenient. That night, he sniffed his dinner and walked away. I waited 10 minutes and tried again. Nothing. I checked his medication, his water, even the expiration date on the food, although I knew the bag was new. Come on, buddy. Benny looked at me with the exhausted patience of someone disappointed by my intelligence. There was one trick Miles used when Benny got stubborn about eating. I remembered the routine, but not exactly how he did it. I picked up my phone. Miles answered on the second ring. Everything okay? Benny won't eat. There was a brief silence. Did he take his medication? Yes. Water? Yes. Any vomiting? No. He just looks at the food and walks away. I'll come over. You can just tell me what you do. I know. 25 minutes later, Miles was standing in my kitchen. Benny greeted him enthusiastically enough to make my concern feel slightly ridiculous. Traitor, I muttered. Miles crouched beside him, checked him over, then walked toward the cabinet where I kept Benny's supplies. He opened the correct door without asking. I noticed. You remember where everything is? Miles glanced over his shoulder. You haven't moved it. I moved half this apartment after you left. Not Benny's stuff. He said it casually, but the words stayed with me. Miles took out Benny's food and prepared it the way we used to when Benny was being difficult, warming it slightly and adding a little water before setting the bowl down. Benny sniffed it, then started eating. I folded my arms. I hate both of you. Miles laughed. Was the same laugh I used to hear from the kitchen while I was half asleep on the couch. For one dangerous second, the 8 months between then and now seemed less real than the sound. He probably just wanted it warmer, Miles said. I did warm it. How long? I don't know. A reasonable amount of time. That means 5 seconds. It means I don't measure dog food temperature like a laboratory experiment. You used to make fun of me for this. I still do. Miles smiled at me. And there it was again. That ease neither of us seemed able to prevent when we were doing something familiar together. Benny finished half the bowl, then wandered toward the living room. Miles followed him. I followed Miles. He knelt beside Benny near the couch and ran a hand along his side. He seemed normal with me this morning, he said. He seemed normal when you got here. We should keep watching him. I nodded. If he skips another meal, we call the vet. Agreed. We said it simultaneously. Miles looked at me. I looked at him. For years, decisions about Benny had happened exactly like that. One of us noticed something. The other checked it. We disagreed over details, then somehow arrived at the same answer. Breaking up had divided our weeks. It apparently hadn't divided that part of us. Benny rolled onto his side. Miles reached toward his collar just as I reached to scratch beneath his chin. Our hands stopped over Benny's chest, closer than they had been at the park. Miles's fingers were inches from mine. Neither of us moved for a second. Then I pulled my hand back. Miles did the same. Benny stared at us, unimpressed. Miles cleared his throat and stood. I stayed crouched beside Benny. You know, I said, you didn't have to come all the way over. I know. You could have explained the food thing on the phone. I know. I looked up at him. His expression changed, not enough to give me an answer, only enough to make me aware there was one he wasn't giving. Then he glanced toward the framed print above my couch. You finally replaced that terrible blue one. I stood slowly. That was 3 months ago. Miles looked back at me. I waited. He seemed to realize what he had just admitted. How did you know? I noticed during a handoff. You barely come inside during handoffs. Sometimes I do. Apparently long enough to inventory my walls. That sounds creepier when you say it like that. I almost smiled. Almost. Instead, I looked around my apartment. The cabinet. The couch. Benny lying between us. Miles knowing where things still belonged and noticing the things that had changed. For months, I had treated our exchanges like brief administrative meetings. Benny moved from one home to the other. We exchanged information. Miles left, but Miles had been paying attention. Not just to Benny, to me. Benny lifted his head, then lowered it again without touching the rest of his dinner. The warmth in the room disappeared beneath a fresh edge of concern. Miles noticed too. If he still won't finish breakfast tomorrow, we should get him checked. I'll call first thing. Text me. I will. Miles picked up his jacket but hesitated before putting it on. I can stay a little longer. I looked at Benny, then at him. Yeah, I said. Okay. Miles sat at the opposite end of the couch while Benny rested between us. There was nothing romantic about it. That was what I told myself. But as the evening stretched quietly around the three of us, I couldn't stop thinking about how easily Miles had stepped back into the room, or how little it felt like he had ever really left. The next morning, Benny ate 3 bites of breakfast and walked away. I called the vet before I could talk myself into waiting. By the afternoon, Miles and I were sitting beside each other in the waiting room with Benny stretched across the floor between our chairs. Miles kept one hand on his back. He's going to be okay, I said. I know. You don't sound like you know. Miles glanced at me. Neither do you. Fair. When the veterinarian called us in, we answered questions together without discussing who should speak. Miles knew what Benny had eaten during his week. I knew exactly when his appetite had changed. Between us, we had the whole picture. The examination didn't reveal anything immediately alarming. We were told to keep monitoring him and follow the care instructions we were given. Outside, the afternoon air felt colder than it had when we arrived. Benny walked slowly between us toward the parking lot. Miles exhaled. I hate this. Waiting. Not being able to fix it. I looked at him. That sentence belonged to more than Benny, and we both seemed to know it. We weren't very good at fixing things, I said. Miles stopped walking. Benny stopped with him. I wished immediately that I had kept my mouth shut. Miles looked across the parking lot. Is that what you think happened? What do you mean? With us. I tightened my grip on Benny's leash. I think we stopped being able to make each other happy. That isn't what I asked. It's close enough. No, Evan. It isn't. There was no anger in his voice. Somehow that made it harder. I looked at him. You were the one who kept pulling away. And you were the one who decided every bad week meant we were finished. That's not fair. Neither was acting like every argument was proof we shouldn't be together. I stared at him. For 8 months, I had carried a clean version of our breakup because clean versions were easier to survive. Miles had wanted distance. I had finally given it to him. We had both accepted the ending. Apparently, Miles had been carrying a different story. You stopped talking to me, I said, because every time I tried to tell you I was struggling, you started preparing for the breakup before I'd even finished the sentence. I was trying to protect myself. I know. The answer came so quickly that it disarmed me. Miles stepped closer when Benny shifted against my leg. His hand moved toward my arm instinctively. He stopped before touching me, but he didn't step away. I wasn't trying to get free of you, he said quietly. I swallowed. That's what it felt like. I know that too. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Benny leaned against both our legs, tired from the appointment. I looked down at him because looking at Miles had become difficult. If you didn't want out, I said, why didn't you come back? Silence. I raised my eyes. Miles's expression closed just enough for me to recognize the old habit immediately. Miles, I don't have a good answer. That's convenient. I didn't say I don't have an answer. The distinction landed between us. Before I could press him, Benny shifted again, and Miles crouched to check him. I watched him run a careful hand over Benny's back. 8 months ago, I had believed our relationship ended because love had slowly disappeared and neither of us had been brave enough to say so. Now I wasn't sure that was true. Maybe love hadn't been the thing we lost. Maybe we had lost the ability to believe the other person would stay through the difficult parts. Miles stood again. We should get him home. I nodded. He remained close enough that our shoulders almost touched as we started toward the car. This time, neither of us deliberately created more distance. And the question following me out of that parking lot was no longer why our relationship had ended. It was why, if Miles had never wanted to be free of me, he had spent 8 months refusing to ask for me back. By the time we got Benny back to my apartment, rain had started tapping against the windows. Miles helped me settle him in the living room. Benny drank some water, circled his bed twice, then lowered himself onto it with a tired sigh. We stood over him like anxious parents pretending not to be anxious. He looks comfortable, I said. Yeah. You can go home. Miles looked at Benny, then at me. I know. He didn't move. I should have reminded him that Benny was with me now, that we had instructions, that we knew what to watch for, that there was no practical reason for both of us to remain in the apartment. Instead, I went to the kitchen. You want coffee? At this hour? You used to drink it at midnight. I used to make bad decisions. I looked back at him. Miles smiled faintly. Coffee's fine. We sat on opposite ends of the couch with Benny resting nearby. Rain softened the sounds from the street until the apartment felt strangely sealed off from everything outside it. For several minutes, we talked about Benny. Then there was nothing left to say about him. Miles turned his cup slowly between his hands. I watched him do it. You always stay. His eyes lifted. What? After handoffs. At the park. Last night. Tonight. I was worried about Benny tonight. I know. I'm not talking about tonight. Miles became still. I continued before I lost my nerve. You find reasons to stay 5 minutes longer. You notice things in my apartment. You rearranged work to protect a custody schedule we could have changed whenever we wanted. Evan? Why? He looked toward Benny. That irritated me more than it should have. No. Don't use him for this. Miles looked back at me. The rain filled the silence. Finally, he said, Because I miss being here. The answer was so simple that I almost didn't understand it. Here? He gave me a tired look. You know what I mean. I did. That was the problem. Miles leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I miss talking to you. I miss knowing stupid things about your day. I miss walking in here and knowing where everything is. My throat tightened. You left. I know. You could have said any of this before. I know. Then why didn't you? His expression shifted, but the wall came down before I could see what was behind it. I don't know how to answer that yet. I almost laughed. Still doing it. Doing what? Getting right up to the thing you actually mean and stopping. Miles flinched. I regretted the cruelty in my tone, but not the truth. He looked down at his hands. I'm trying. So am I. That surprised both of us. Miles raised his head. I stared at my coffee. I look forward to Fridays. He didn't speak. I tell myself it's because I miss Benny when he's with you. And I do. But sometimes I know exactly what time you're supposed to show up, and I start listening for your car. Miles's face changed. I forced myself to continue. Sometimes I'm disappointed when you just take Benny and leave. Evan. I know how pathetic that sounds. It doesn't. I finally looked at him. He had shifted closer without my noticing. Not much. Enough. I look forward to them too, he said. The room seemed suddenly too quiet. Benny slept on. There was no crisis demanding that Miles comfort me. No audience. No reason for either of us to pretend this moment belonged to the dog. Miles moved his hand onto the cushion between us. He stopped there. I could have moved away. I didn't. His eyes searched mine, giving me enough time to refuse whatever was about to happen. Then he leaned closer. The kiss was brief, careful, almost painfully familiar. Miles pulled back first. Neither of us spoke. My heart was beating hard enough that I was sure he could see it. That wasn't about Benny, I said. No, or Portland. No. I looked at his mouth and immediately hated myself for doing it. Miles noticed. He didn't kiss me again. Maybe that restraint frightened me more than the kiss itself, because it meant this wasn't an accident we could blame on fear or exhaustion. I sat back, putting just enough space between us to think. What happens now? Miles looked toward the rain-dark window. I don't know. For once, the answer didn't feel like avoidance. Felt true. Benny shifted in his bed, and both of us looked over automatically. Then our eyes met again. For 8 months, every Friday had come with rules. One of us arrived. Benny changed homes. We exchanged whatever information mattered. Then one of us left. Those rules had survived our breakup because neither of us had challenged them. Now Miles had kissed me on my couch, and I had let him. Whatever happened at the next handoff, neither of us could call it routine anymore. The next Friday, Miles arrived exactly on time. I had spent the entire afternoon telling myself that was good. Predictable was good. The schedule was familiar. Benny was doing better, eating normally again and acting sufficiently offended whenever I checked his bowl too closely. The immediate worry had passed. The kiss had not. When I opened the door, Miles looked at me for half a second too long. Hey! Hey! Benny pushed between us before either of us could decide what came next. Miles crouched to greet him, and I handed over the leash. Our fingers didn't touch. We both noticed. Want to walk him? Miles asked. I almost asked whether he meant together. Instead, I nodded. At the dog park, we kept moving rather than sitting. Benny wandered ahead whenever the leash allowed it, leaving Miles and me side by side with nothing practical enough to hide behind. Finally, Miles said, "Are we going to talk about it? The kiss." Yes, the kiss. I wasn't sure if we were supposed to call it that. His mouth tightened. What else would we call it? A temporary failure of judgment? Was it? I stopped walking. Miles stopped too. No, I said. The answer visibly surprised him. I'm not going to pretend it was a mistake. I wanted you to kiss me. Miles exhaled slowly. But wanting something doesn't mean it's a good idea. There it was, the sentence I had been rehearsing since he left my apartment. Miles looked away. Because we already failed once. Because I don't know what would be different. I could be different. So could I. That doesn't mean we suddenly know how. He nodded, and somehow his agreement hurt more than an argument would have. Benny pulled toward a tree. We started walking again. After a minute, Miles said, "They need my answer Monday." I knew immediately what he meant. Portland. Yeah. The deadline made everything around us feel sharper. What are you going to tell them? I don't know. Miles. I really don't. I looked at him. It's a good job. It is. And you wanted something like this. I did. Then you can't turn it down because we kissed once. His expression hardened. That's not what this is. Then what is it? He was silent long enough to prove my point and contradict it at the same time. Finally, he said, "Leaving feels different now." My chest tightened. Because of Benny? Miles looked directly at me. No, that one word stripped away every safe explanation. He continued quietly. I was already having trouble deciding. Now the idea of leaving you feels different from taking a job somewhere else. I shook my head. You can't make me responsible for that. I'm not. If you stay and we try again and it doesn't work, I know. No, you don't. Because then I become the reason you gave up something you wanted. Miles stopped. I didn't ask you to make the decision for me. And I'm not going to. For a moment, frustration flashed across his face. Then it faded. Okay. We reached the end of the path and turned toward the residential street. Benny walked between us. The old arrangement had always made our lives easy to divide. His week, my week, Miles's choices, mine. Now even Benny's future refused to stay separate. If you move, I said, we can't keep doing alternating weeks. I know. One of us would have to become his primary home. Miles stared ahead. And if that's me, I continued, you'd see him when you could. Visits. Longer stretches sometimes. Whatever works. He swallowed. Yeah. Neither of us said what that would mean for us. There would be no Friday schedule. No guaranteed doorway. No reason to text about pickup times. Benny stopped to sniff the grass, and we stood waiting beside him. Miles's hand hung close to mine. After the kiss, touching him would have been easy. That was exactly why neither of us did it. When we reached my building again, Miles took Benny's leash. I'll bring him back Sunday evening, he said. Okay. He hesitated. Monday for Portland. Sunday for Benny. 2 deadlines separated by less than 24 hours. Miles looked at me as if he wanted to say something else. This time, I didn't rescue him from having to say it. He eventually nodded and walked away with Benny. I watched them go, understanding something I hadn't wanted to admit. The kiss hadn't brought us back together. It had made going back to the way things were impossible. And now the custody schedule that had kept us safely connected for 8 months was running out at exactly the moment neither of us knew whether we were brave enough to replace it with something real. Sunday evening arrived too quickly. I heard Miles's car before I saw it through the window. For 8 months, that sound had meant Benny was coming home. Tonight, it sounded like an ending. I opened the door before Miles knocked. Benny came toward me immediately, leash pulling tight until Miles released enough slack for him to reach my legs. Hey, buddy. I crouched and scratched behind his ears. He looked completely recovered now, energetic and hungry again, which should have made the moment easier. Didn't. Miles stepped inside only far enough to close the door behind him. I packed the rest of his medication. Thanks. And his things are all in the bag. I looked at the bag beside his feet. More than he normally brought back. Miles noticed me noticing. Neither of us pretended otherwise. We had already agreed that if he moved, Benny would stay primarily with me. There was no sensible reason to keep alternating weeks while Miles prepared to build a life in another city. So this is it? I asked. Miles looked at Benny. For the schedule, probably. The word probably irritated me. You have to answer Portland tomorrow. I know. And I'm still deciding. I stood. Benny wandered toward his bed, leaving Miles and me facing each other without him between us. I keep thinking about something you said. I told him. What? That you rearranged work to protect the schedule. Miles went still. There were easier ways to handle custody, I continued. You knew that. I knew that. Evan, why did it matter so much? His eyes dropped. That was answer enough to make my heart start beating faster. Miles. He rubbed a hand over the back of his neck. There were times we could have changed it. I know. No, he looked at me. I mean more than switching weekends. I waited. After we broke up, there were times I thought maybe Benny should just stay with you. I stared at him. You never told me that. I know. You fought for equal time. I know. Then why? Miles looked toward the door, and for one terrible second I thought he was going to retreat again. Instead, he stayed. Because if we shared him, I knew I'd see you. The room went silent. He swallowed. Every Friday, I knew I had a reason to come here. Or you had a reason to come to me. I didn't have to wonder whether texting you was pathetic or whether you wanted me gone completely. I could just say I was coming for Benny. I couldn't speak. Miles gave a small, humorless laugh. I told myself it was fair custody. And it was. I love him. You know I do. I know. But equal weeks weren't the only way to love him. Something inside me shifted painfully into place. The rearranged meetings. The extended handoffs. The coffee. The things he noticed in my apartment. All those Fridays I had treated as obligations. You could have asked to see me, I said. I was scared you'd say no. So instead you hid behind our dog for 8 months? His face tightened. Yes. The honesty made me angrier, not less. That's exactly what destroyed us, Miles. I know. You wait until something matters, then you say half of it. You make me guess the rest. I know. And now you're telling me this when you might leave tomorrow? I should have told you sooner. Yes. I wanted to. That isn't the same as doing it. Miles nodded. There was nothing left for him to defend. Benny lifted his head from across the room, watching us. I looked at him, then back at Miles. We can't do this anymore. Pain crossed Miles's face. I forced myself to continue. I don't mean Benny. I mean using Benny to keep something alive because neither of us is willing to choose it. Miles's eyes stayed on mine. If you go to Portland, go because that's what you choose. If you stay, stay because that's what you choose. But there can't be another custody schedule designed to make sure we keep accidentally seeing each other. He nodded slowly. You're right. For once I hated hearing it. Miles picked up nothing. Benny's things were already here. He moved toward the door alone. His hand rested on the handle. I am sorry, Evan. I believed him. That wasn't enough. Good night, Miles. Good night. He left. No leash went with him. No bag. No date for another exchange. I closed the door and looked at Benny. For 8 months, I had always known when I would see Miles again. Next Friday. Then next Friday. Then the Friday after that. Now there was nothing on the calendar that required him to come back. And for the first time since our breakup, if Miles ever stood at my door again, it would have to be because he had chosen me. Monday evening, I was standing in the kitchen filling Benny's water bowl when someone knocked. Not 2 quick knocks followed by the sound of Benny losing his mind. Just a knock. Benny still recognized it. He ran toward the door, but I stayed where I was for a second. There was no scheduled handoff. No medication to return. No leash changing hands. When I opened the door, Miles stood alone. Benny immediately pushed past my legs to greet him. Miles crouched, scratched behind his ears, then looked up at me. I told Portland no. Stared at him. When? This afternoon. My first reaction wasn't relief. It was fear. Miles. Before you say anything, I didn't turn it down because I expect you to take me back. I stopped. He stood. It was my decision. I had to make it without using you as an excuse, just like you said. Then why did you say no? Miles took a breath. Because when I stopped asking what I was supposed to choose, I realized I didn't actually want the life that job required me to build. I searched his face. And if I tell you I don't want to try again, it'll hurt. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. His voice stayed steady. I'll still know I made my own decision, and I'll live with it. That was different. The Miles I had loved before would have buried his choice inside circumstances until neither of us knew what he actually wanted. The Miles standing in front of me had removed every excuse before knocking. "So why are you here?" I asked. His eyes held mine. "Because I want you." The words hit harder than the kiss had. Not because of Benny. Not because I missed the apartment. Not because Friday nights became a habit. He paused. "I want another chance with you." I looked away. Benny had settled near Miles's feet as if this were another ordinary exchange. It wasn't. "You said we couldn't go back," Miles continued. "We can't." "I agree." I looked at him again. "I don't want to pretend the breakup didn't happen. I don't want to move back in tomorrow or act like one kiss fixed 8 months of being apart." He swallowed. "I want to date you again." Despite everything, a laugh escaped me. Miles blinked. "That bad?" "No. It's just strange hearing my ex ask me out. I can make it more romantic." "Please don't." That almost made him smile. Then the fear returned. "What happens the first time something gets hard?" "I talk." "You say that now." "I know." "And what happens when I decide one bad week means you're already halfway out the door?" "You talk too." I folded my arms. "So your grand plan is communication?" "My grand plan is apparently discovering basic adult skills in my 30s. I laughed again, quieter this time. Then neither of us was laughing. Miles stepped closer, but stopped well before touching me. "I can't promise we won't fail again." "No. I can promise I won't make Benny do the asking for me." My throat tightened. For months, I had blamed Miles for leaving while quietly building my own defenses against being left again. If I said no now, I could keep those defenses intact. I could also spend years wondering whether I had confused safety with certainty. "What does dating your ex even look like?" I asked. Miles's expression changed, hope appearing cautiously. "I assume dinner is involved." "Very ambitious. Maybe a movie after several successful dinners." "Slow down." "Sorry." I looked at Benny, then back at Miles. "Friday." "What?" "You used to come here every Friday because the schedule told you to." Miles waited. "Come Friday because I'm asking you to." For a moment he didn't move. "Is that a date?" "Yes." His smile appeared slowly. "A real one?" "Miles. Just establishing the relationship state." I shook my head, but I was smiling too. Then I reached for him. That mattered. The first kiss had happened in the uncertainty of losing something we had never properly let go. This one was different. I put my hand against his face and kissed him because there was no schedule left to blame. Miles touched my waist carefully, waiting until I moved closer before holding me. When we separated, his forehead rested briefly against mine. "So I should go?" he asked. I looked toward the living room, then back at him. "No." His eyes searched mine. "Stay." One word, but this time neither of us could mistake what it meant. Miles stepped fully inside. Benny followed us toward the living room without understanding that, for once, he hadn't brought us together. We had done that ourselves. 3 weeks later, I found the old custody calendar while looking for a receipt in the kitchen drawer. I almost threw it away without opening it. Then I saw the alternating notes written across the Fridays. Evan's week. Miles's week. Evan's week. Miles's week. For 8 months, those words had organized our lives into clean sections. Benny belonged with me, then with Miles. We exchanged food, medication, instructions, and carefully edited versions of ourselves. Now Benny's leash stayed by my door. His food stayed in one kitchen. And Miles came over because he wanted to. We hadn't tried to rebuild our old relationship overnight. We went on the Friday date I had asked him to come to. Then another. When something bothered Miles, he practiced saying it before silence could turn it into distance. When I caught myself treating a difficult conversation like evidence that we were already failing, I told him instead of preparing for an ending he hadn't chosen. It wasn't effortless. That was exactly why it felt real. That evening, Miles was sitting on my couch while Benny slept on the floor beside him. "You're staring at paper," Miles said. "I'm reflecting dramatically." "That sounds dangerous." I carried the calendar into the living room. Miles recognized it immediately. "Oh." I sat beside him and held it between us. "You really built your entire strategy around this thing." In my defense, it worked. "For custody." He looked at me. "Right, custody." I nudged his shoulder. Miles smiled, then grew quieter. "I should have just told you I wanted to see you." "Yes, I know that now. And I should have asked why you kept showing up instead of deciding I already knew." He reached for my hand. This time, neither of us hesitated. Benny stirred, opened one eye, and apparently decided we weren't interesting enough to wake up for. I looked again at the calendar. The last written Friday still said Miles's week. Miles was here, but not because the calendar said so. Not because Benny needed to change homes. Not because either of us required an excuse anymore. I tore the old schedule down the middle and dropped it onto the coffee table. Miles raised an eyebrow. "Very dramatic." I learned from staring at paper. He laughed and pulled me closer. Benny remained asleep beside us. For months, I had thought sharing custody was the last piece of the life Miles and I had failed to keep. I understood it differently now. It had been the thread neither of us was ready to cut. But we didn't need it anymore. There was no Evan's week. No Miles's week. Miles was staying tonight because he wanted to, and I wanted him to stay.